The morning my own brother walked into a courtroom to testify against me, he was wearing the watch I had given him for his birthday 2 years earlier. I noticed it the second he sat down. I had saved for 3 months to buy that watch. I remember wrapping it myself, writing his name on the card, and believing that he would always be on my side. He sat across from me under fluorescent lights with that watch on his wrist, ready to tell a judge that I had stolen from our family. I had not stolen anything. I had built something. And somewhere between the moment I started building and the moment I succeeded, my family had decided that my success was actually their loss, and they were going to make me pay for it in the most permanent way they could think of. Before I tell you what happened inside that courtroom, I want to ask you something real. Have you ever worked so hard for something, sacrificed so much, stayed so quiet through so much pain, and then watched the people closest to you try to take it apart the moment it started to matter? If that sounds familiar in any way, stay with me. Because Nadia's story is not just about one family and one courtroom. It is about what happens when the people who were supposed to protect you choose power over truth, and what happens when the truth finally gets its turn to speak. Nadia was 34 years old when her family filed the fraud complaint. She was sitting in her office at the time, reviewing a quarterly report, drinking her second cup of coffee, and feeling for the first time in years like things were actually working. Her company, a small but growing logistics consulting firm she had built from the ground up over 5 years, had just landed its largest contract to date. The number on the signed agreement still made her hands feel slightly unsteady when she thought about it, not from fear. From disbelief that something she had poured every quiet weekend, every late Tuesday night, and every dollar she had saved since her mid-20s into was finally returning something real. She had not come from money, that part matters. Nadia's parents had worked hard their whole lives, but the family had always lived carefully. There were 4 children in the house where Nadia grew up herself: her older brother Marcus, her younger sister Priya, and the youngest, a brother named Dean, who had always been the lightest presence in any room. Their mother, Carla, was the kind of woman who could make any situation feel managed. Organized, warm, and always thinking 2 steps ahead on behalf of the family. Their father, Raymond, was quieter. He worked long hours in construction management, came home tired, and left most of the family decisions to Carla. He loved his children in the way that men of his generation often showed love: through presence, through steadiness, through showing up even when they did not always say the right thing. Nadia had grown up in that house feeling both seen and invisible at the same time. She was the responsible one. The one who helped with homework, tracked school deadlines, called the insurance company when her parents forgot, organized the birthday dinners, and held the family together in the thousand small ways that no one ever fully notices until the person doing it stops. She was the dependable one. And like most dependable people, she had slowly come to understand that being dependable does not guarantee being valued. It sometimes just guarantees being used. Marcus was the oldest, and for most of their childhood, Nadia had looked up to him. He was charming, funny in the way that made you forget he had done something that irritated you, and he had always carried a kind of easy confidence that Nadia quietly envied when she was young. She had worked harder than Marcus in school. She had gotten better grades. But Marcus had the kind of social ease that Nadia lacked, and in the world their family moved through, social ease went further than report cards most of the time. Marcus had drifted through his 20s through a string of sales jobs, half-started business ideas, and short enthusiasms that burned bright and disappeared quickly. Nadia had watched this pattern quietly for years and said nothing, because Marcus was her brother and she loved him, and because saying something felt like choosing a fight she did not want. Priya was different from both of them. She had married young, had 2 children, and had built her life around her household. She was not a bad person. She was simply someone who had a very particular vision of how family was supposed to work, and anyone who did not fit neatly into that vision made her uncomfortable in a way she rarely admitted openly. Nadia had always felt slightly outside Priya's definition of family because Nadia was not married, did not have children, and had spent the last several years building something instead of settling into something. In Priya's world, building was fine as long as it did not make a Nyon else feel behind. Dean, the youngest, had always been closest to Nadia in temperament, quieter, more thoughtful, more comfortable sitting with complexity than the others. He had gone into accounting, was good at it, and had been working at the same mid-size firm for 7 years by the time the story begins. He and Nadia had stayed close through their adult lives in the easy, undemanding way that suited both of them. They did not need to talk every day, but when they talked, it meant something. Nadia trusted Dean in a way she did not fully trust Marcus or Priya, though she had never said it out loud. Their mother Carla held the family together with a fierce, unspoken commitment to the idea that family came first above everything. She said this often, usually in the moments when saying it cost her nothing. What she meant by family, Nadia would eventually realize, was a very specific arrangement, an arrangement where everyone stayed close, stayed manageable, stayed within a range that Carla could understand and organize. Success that fell outside that range made Carla nervous in a way she expressed not through cruelty but through subtle redirection. Through casually mentioning someone else's stability when Nadia mentioned a risk she was taking. through changing the subject when Nadia shared good news, through asking the wrong questions at the right moments. Raymond had become quieter as he aged. His health had begun to slip in his early 60s, nothing catastrophic, but a slow accumulation of the things that come from decades of physical work and the particular kind of stress that never fully releases. By the time Nadia's company began to show real promise, her father was spending more time at home, managing a heart condition with medication and a careful routine that Carla maintained with military precision. This was the family Nadia moved through. This was the weight she carried quietly alongside everything she was building. The company had started with a simple observation. Nadia had spent 6 years working in supply chain management for a regional shipping company, and she had watched over and over again the same kinds of inefficiencies repeat themselves across mid-sized businesses that had grown too fast to properly systematize their logistics. She had proposed solutions at her job that were received politely and then quietly ignored. After the third time this happened in the same calendar year, Nadia sat in her car in the parking structure outside her office for 20 minutes thinking about what she actually wanted to do with the knowledge she had spent years accumulating. The answer she arrived at was not dramatic. It was just honest. She wanted to do this herself. She wanted to be the one who built the solution instead of the one who watched someone else fail to build it. She had started small, a single client, a small furniture distributor that she had connected with through a former colleague, paying her a modest monthly retainer to audit and restructure their delivery operations. She did the work on evenings and weekends for the first 8 months while still holding her day job. She kept a single spreadsheet tracking every dollar that came in and every dollar that went out. She reinvested everything. She did not take a salary from the company for the first year and a half. She lived on her employment income, ate simply, skipped the trips she would have liked to take, and funneled everything she had into the thing she was building. By the time she left her day job, she had 4 clients and a part-time assistant. By year 2, she had 9 clients, 2 full-time employees, and a small but real profit margin. By year 4, the company had grown to a point that surprised even Nadia, not in a lottery ticket way, but in the steady, compounding way that real work produces when it is actually meeting a real need. She had become someone other logistics professionals called when they had a problem they could not solve internally. She had built a reputation. She had built something that had her name on it in a way that nothing else in her life ever had. Her family knew she had a business. They knew it in the way that families sometimes know things that exist outside their daily understanding, as a fact they had heard but not fully absorbed. Her mother sometimes introduced her at gatherings as Nadia who does the consulting thing. Her brother Marcus had asked her twice in the space of a year if she needed investors, both times framing himself as someone with connections who might be able to help, and both times retreating smoothly when Nadia said politely that she was not looking for outside investment. Priya occasionally forwarded her LinkedIn articles about work-life balance as though Nadia were in danger of disappearing into her work entirely. Dean was the only one who had ever asked specific, genuine questions: how the model worked, how she priced her services, what her biggest operation. Al's challenge was, those conversations had mattered to Nadia more than her family likely knew. The first sign that something was shifting in how her family perceived her success came at a Sunday dinner in early spring, about 7 months before the fraud complaint was filed. Her mother had made the kind of meal that meant the gathering was intentional: roast chicken, the good bread, the careful tablecloth. Nadia had arrived to find Marcus already there, which was unusual since Marcus typically arrived last and left first. He was sitting at the kitchen table talking to their father with an energy that read as rehearsed even from the doorway. Nadia had felt the texture of something prepared hanging in the room, but she had told herself she was imagining it and sat down. It came up after dinner in the way that family conversations about money always seem to come up after dinner, gradually, casually, as though it had not been planned. Marcus mentioned that he was in the middle of launching a new venture, a franchise concept he explained, something in the food and beverage space. He had done the research, he said, he had a partner who knew the industry. What he needed was startup capital to secure the first location and cover the initial operating costs. He was talking to several people, he said, family first though, always family first. The number he mentioned was not small. Nadia listened carefully. She asked reasonable questions. She asked about his business plan, his projected cash flow timeline, his partner's background in the industry. Marcus answered some of these questions with confidence and others with the kind of smooth pivot that she recognized from years of watching him handle things he did not fully know. The conversation ended without a commitment from Nadia. She said she would think about it. She said she needed to look at her own situation carefully before making that kind of decision. Her mother had been quiet during the whole exchange in a way that felt louder than speaking. On the drive home, Nadia had felt something she could not entirely name. It was not suspicion exactly. It was more like the early awareness that a situation had a shape she had not yet fully seen. In the following weeks, her mother called twice. The calls were warm but carried a thread of the franchise conversation beneath the surface. Her mother mentioned how much Marcus had been working on this, how seriously he was taking it this time, how it would mean a great deal to him to know his family believed in him. Nadia listened carefully. She was kind in her responses. She did not promise anything. Then Marcus called. He was charming and enthusiastic and outlined the opportunity with more polish than he had shown at the dinner table. He sent her a document, 3 pages, rough around the edges but real enough, describing the concept. He also mentioned, almost as an aside, that their parents had put in some money already, a contribution toward the initial costs, he said, not a loan, a gift, because they believed in what he was doing. Nadia had sat with that information for a long time. She had not known her parents were contributing, they had not mentioned it, and she had felt something complicated move through her, not quite jealousy, not quite hurt, but something in that territory. She had never asked her parents for financial support in her adult life, not once. She had built everything herself quietly without expecting anyone to back her. And somewhere in the conversation with Marcus, something shifted. Not toward giving him money, but toward a clearer understanding of the position she was being placed in without her consent. She declined. She did it kindly, carefully, and clearly. She told Marcus that she did not make investments in businesses where she did not have visibility into the financial controls, and that she did not think it was the right fit for her situation right now. She wished him genuinely well with the venture. She meant it. The silence that followed from Marcus lasted 3 weeks. When he resurfaced, he was pleasant but slightly different toward her, the kind of pleasant that has a cold seam running through it. Their mother said nothing directly but stopped calling as frequently. Priya sent a message about a family gathering that mentioned Nadia's name in the attendance list, but with a formality that had not been there before. Nadia noticed all of it. She noted it the way she noted everything, carefully, quietly, without making it immediately into a confrontation. She kept working. The large contract she had been pursuing for almost a year finally came through 6 weeks after the dinner conversation. She received the signed agreement on a Tuesday afternoon and sat with the weight of it in her chest for a while before she told anyone. The first person she told was Dean. He congratulated her with the specific warmth of someone who knew exactly how much work it had taken. She appreciated that more than she could easily say. She did not tell Marcus, she did not tell Priya. She told her parents in a brief, matter-of-fact way during a phone call, mentioned that a big contract had come through, that it was a significant milestone, that she was grateful and excited. Her mother said, "That's wonderful, honey," in a voice that carried the words without the weight. Her father said, "That's my girl," in a way that sounded real. She held on to that. The fraud complaint arrived 8 weeks later. It came in the form of a formal notification from a state regulatory body, the kind of letter that arrives in a white envelope with government printing and lands on your desk like a dropped weight. Nadia read it twice at her office desk before she called anyone. Then she read it a third time. Then she sat very still for several minutes, doing the work of understanding what she was looking at without letting her emotions make the room too small. The complaint alleged that Nadia had misrepresented her qualifications and business credentials to clients. It alleged that she had used falsified documentation to secure contracts. It alleged financial irregularities consistent with deceptive business practices. It was detailed. It was specific in the places that mattered for official attention. And it had been filed by a party identified in the notification only as a concerned former associate. Nadia knew. She did not have proof yet, but she knew the way you know something when it lands in a direction you have been half watching without wanting to acknowledge what you were watching for. She called her attorney that afternoon, a woman named Patricia Oath, who had handled Nadia's corporate filings from the beginning and who had become, over the years, one of the clearest and most direct voices in Nadia's professional life. Patricia listened to the full situation without interrupting. Then she asked 3 specific questions. Then she told Nadia what they needed to do. The first step was documentation. Nadia spent the next 72 hours pulling together every record she owned, every contract, every client communication, every credential, every certification, every bank statement, every invoice, every receipt, every piece of correspondence that touched her business from the day she registered it to the morning she received the complaint. She worked with the focused energy of someone who is not afraid because they are guilty, but because they are innocent and they know how much it costs to prove that. She built a file so complete and so organized that Patricia, reviewing it 3 days later, said something Nadia held on to for the weeks that followed. She said, "Nadia, this file alone tells the story." The regulatory body opened a formal review. Nadia cooperated completely. She provided every document requested. She answered every question put to her with precision and honesty. She did not guess. She did not over-explain. She did not panic. She documented everything, including the timing of the complaint relative to her recent business milestone, which Patricia noted would be relevant if the review escalated. It escalated, not because the evidence supported the complaint, it did not, but because the person who had filed the complaint had retained their own legal representation and had submitted a supplemental filing that amplified the original allegations and added new details that were, Nadia could now see clearly, constructed from partial truths twisted into a shape designed to look like fraud. Someone had taken real facts about her business, real contract structures, real timelines, real amounts, and rewoven them into a version of events that, to someone reading without the full context, could look like a pattern of deception. Whoever had done this knew enough about her business to make the distortion feel plausible. That narrowed the field considerably. Her attorney filed a formal response, strong, documented, precise. Then Patricia told Nadia something that changed the texture of the following weeks. She told Nadia they needed to know who filed the original complaint because the supplemental filing contained details that were not publicly available, specific details, internal details, details that only someone with a personal connection to Nadia's business operations could have known. Nadia already knew what that meant, but knowing and proving are two different things, and she was not going to act without the second. The answer came from an unexpected direction. One of Nadia's employees, a woman named Tara who had been with the company for 2 years and who Nadia trusted completely, mentioned carefully and gently that she had received a call several weeks earlier from someone asking general questions about how the company operated. The caller had identified themselves as a potential future client, but the questions, Tara said, had felt less like client questions and more like verification questions. Like someone checky. NG facts, like someone building a record of something they were going to use. Tara had not thought much of it at the time, but she had made a note because Tara was thorough by nature. She still had the number. The number, traced carefully and legally, led to a phone registered in the name of a company. That company, looked up in the public record, was connected to a franchise consultancy. That franchise consultancy was, according to its own filings, partially owned by a man named Marcus Adami. Nadia sat with that for a long time. She did not cry. She felt something heavier than crying, the particular grief of a wound that makes sense, that you half saw coming, that hurts more because your own hope delayed your awareness of it. She had given Marcus the benefit of the doubt every time she had a reason not to. She had wanted to believe that what she felt at the dinner table was imagination. It had not been imagination, it had been accurate. She told Dean. He went quiet on the phone for a long moment and then he said, "Nadia, I didn't know. I want you to know I didn't know." She believed him. His voice carried the specific quality of someone learning something that reorders their understanding of their own family. Then she told Patricia. Patricia moved quickly. She pulled together a motion that documented the timeline, the dinner where Marcus requested money, Nadia's refusal, the timing of the complaint relative to Nadia's new contract and her refusal of Marcus's request, the call to Tara, the phone trace, the corporate filings. The picture was clear. The complaint had not come from a concerned former associate. It had come from a rejected family member with financial motivation to damage Nadia's credibility and business standing at the moment when that standing was at its highest. The regulatory body, presented with this evidence in the formal legal response, flagged the complaint for a formal hearing. In regulatory terms, this meant that both sides would present their case and the reviewing body would issue a determination. In practical terms, it meant that Nadia was going to have to sit across from people she was related to in a formal proceeding and tell the truth out loud. She prepared for it the same way she prepared for everything difficult, methodically, without dramatics, with the kind of focus that comes from understanding that the only thing you can control is how completely you have done the work. During the weeks leading up to the hearing, her family did not go quiet. Priya called once to say that she hoped Nadia understood the family was not against her, that Marcus had only been trying to protect certain shared family interests, that there were concerns about the way the business had grown that maybe Nadia had not considered. Nadia listened. She asked Priya to explain which family interests she meant specifically. Priya became vague. Nadia thanked her for calling and ended the conversation. Her mother called twice. The first call was about her father's health, a genuine concern, and Nadia listened with genuine care. The second call included a careful suggestion that perhaps this whole situation could be resolved without further legal escalation if Nadia were willing to sit down with Marcus and discuss what everyone was feeling. Nadia recognized the shape of that suggestion. It was the kind of offer that sounds like peace and functions as surrender. She declined it gently but without ambiguity. She said she was going through the formal process and she trusted that process to produce the right outcome. Dean had called Nadia 3 times in the weeks before the hearing. None of those calls were about strategy or positioning. They were about checking in. He called once to make sure she was eating properly. He called once to say he thought she was handling the whole thing with more grace than anyone should have to. He called once to tell her he planned to attend the hearing and that he would sit on her side of the room. That call had meant something to Nadia that she could not reduce to words. She had thanked him and meant it more than he probably knew. The morning of the hearing, Nadia arrived early. Patricia was already there, organized and calm. Nadia wore a dark blazer she had bought specifically for important professional moments, not to perform composure, but because she had learned that dressing with care was a form of showing up fully, of telling herself and everyone in the room that she took what she was doing seriously. She set her folder on the table, she drank water, she breathed. Marcus arrived with his own attorney, a man named Broughton who had a practiced look of confident neutrality. Marcus did not make eye contact with Nadia when he came in. He sat at the opposite table and arranged his own papers with the focused attention of someone trying very hard not to be seen trying. Nadia noted the watch on his wrist. She noted it and she let it pass. This was not the moment for that kind of feeling. That moment would come later alone when she could let herself feel it without losing her ground. The hearing was formal but not a courtroom in the traditional sense. It was conducted by a senior regulatory officer and two independent reviewers, all three of them seated at a long table at the front of the room. The process was structured and methodical. Each party presented their summary, documents were submitted. The details were examined in a clinical way that stripped the story of its emotional texture and left only the sequence of events and the evidence attached to each event. When Patricia presented Nadia's case, she did so with a clarity and a precision that Nadia had been watching her practice for weeks. She walked the panel through the timeline from the first day of the company's registration to the filing of the complaint. She showed the credentials, the certifications, the client contracts, the financial records, all of it accurate, all of it complete, all of it dated. She then walked through the second timeline: Marcus's dinner request, Nadia's refusal, the timing of the complaint filing, the call to Tara, the phone trace, the corporate connection. She presented the franchise company filings. She laid it out slowly enough for everything to land. The senior officer stopped the room at that point. He reviewed the documents in front of him, the ones connecting the complaint's originating phone number to the franchise company connected to Marcus. He looked at Marcus's attorney. He asked a direct question about whether counsel was prepared to address the origin of the complaint. Broughton asked for a brief recess. The officer allowed 5 minutes. When they came back, Broughton asked to make a supplemental statement on behalf of his client. He stated that the original complaint had been filed based on concerns shared within the family context, that some of those concerns may have been informed by miscommunication about the nature of Nadia's business operations, and that his client was prepared to withdraw the complaint if the matter could be resolved through private agreement. The senior officer said something that Nadia would return to many times in the years that followed. He looked directly at Marcus's side of the table and he said quietly, "This is not a family conversation. A formal complaint was filed with this body alleging specific professional misconduct. That allegation was either accurate or it was not. The evidence presented this morning indicates it was not. What it additionally indicates is that this complaint was filed with material knowledge of the respondent's business, by a party with a documented financial grievance against the respondent, within weeks of the respondent securing a major contract. That pattern does not describe a good faith regulatory concern. It describes something else." He did not raise his voice, he did not need to, the room was very quiet. The determination was issued within 10 days. The complaint was dismissed. The evidence did not support the allegations. The filing was flagged in the record as having originated from a conflicted party. Nadia's business record was formally cleared. What happened after that took several forms simultaneously, and none of them were simple. The regulatory body's dismissal was not a secret. In the professional community where Nadia operated, word moved. Not loudly, but in the specific way that professional reputations move: through quiet conversations, through the questions that stopped being asked, through the clients who had been watching the process and who reached out in the weeks after the dismissal with renewed interest, and in two cases with new contract proposals. Nadia handled each of those conversations with the same care she brought to everything. She did not perform bitterness. She did not perform triumph. She showed up and did the work and let the work speak. Marcus did not contact her directly for almost 4 months. When he did, it was a message, not a call. The message said that he regretted how things had unfolded, that he had allowed his frustration to push him into actions he was not proud of, and that he hoped eventually there might be a path back to something better between them. Nadia read the message 3 times. She did not respond immediately. She sat with it for several days, turning it over the way you turn over something you need to understand before you decide what to do with it. She responded eventually. The message she sent was short. She told him she had read what he wrote. She told him she understood that people make choices they regret. She told him she was not in a place to pretend that what had not happened, or to move forward as though it had been a small thing because it had not been a small thing. She told him she wished him genuinely well. She told him that the door to any real relationship between them would require something she did not yet have evidence of: actual accountability, not expressed from a safe distance but shown through changed behavior over time. She told him she was going to take care of herself now. She sent the message and then she closed her phone and went back to work. Her mother was harder because Carla had not filed the complaint. Carla had not made the phone call to Tara. Carla had not hired an attorney or built a case or sat across a table and tried to dismantle what Nadia had spent 5 years constructing. What Carla had done was subtler and in some ways more difficult to hold clearly. She had allowed it. She had known that Marcus was building something against Nadia, not the specific details perhaps, but she had known the direction of his anger and she had not warned her daughter. She had called suggesting private resolution not because she believed private resolution was fair, but because she wanted the situation to disappear without anyone having to fully account for what it had been. Carla had wanted to manage the aftermath without examining the cause. Nadia thought about this for a long time. She thought about the years of feeling visible and invisible at the same time. She thought about the birthday card on the watch. She thought about the specific quality of her mother's silences. She thought about what it meant to be the dependable one in a family where dependability had functioned as a kind of permanent borrowable resource that no one ever fully returned. She went to see her mother on a Wednesday afternoon in early autumn. She sat in the kitchen that she had grown up in at a table where most of the important family conversations had happened, and she said what she had come to say. She said it quietly and carefully, without cruelty, but without softening it past the point of honesty. She told her mother what the year had cost her. Not in dollars, though the legal defense had been significant, but in the specific currency of trust and safety that cannot be deposited or withdrawn but makes the difference between a life where you feel held and one where you feel exposed. She told her mother that she needed to know she was safe in her own family. She told her mother she was not confident that she had ever had that and that she was no longer able to pretend otherwise. Her mother had started to cry partway through, the kind of crying that is real but also functions as a way of shifting the emotional center of a room. Nadia had recognized it. She had not been unkind, but she had not stopped. She had finished what she came to say, then she had sat quietly and allowed her mother to respond. What Carla said surprised Nadia, not because it was the full accountability she had hoped for, it was not, but because inside the expected deflections and the reflexive defenses, there was a moment where her mother went quiet and then said something small and true. She said she had always found Nadia the hardest to help because Nadia had always seemed like she did not need help. She said she knew that was not an excuse. She said she was sorry that she had not called when she should have. Nadia had driven home slowly that evening. The sky was doing something particular, that late autumn color that is partly gold and partly the beginning of everything letting go. She had felt something move in her chest that was not quite forgiveness and not quite closure, but was its own real thing. A kind of recognition. A kind of release of the version of her family she had always wanted them to be, and a very careful, conscious beginning of accepting who they actually were. She did not stop loving her mother. She did not stop being her mother's daughter. But she became, from that autumn afternoon onward, someone who held that love with eyes open, who brought it with warmth and chose it deliberately rather than giving it automatically out of loyalty and hope. That distinction, quiet as it sounds, had taken her 34 years to arrive at, and it changed everything about how she moved through the following years. Her father had his own response to the situation. He did not come to the hearing, he had not been well enough, and Nadia had not asked him to. But in the month after the determination, he had called her on a Sunday morning early when she was having coffee. He had asked how she was, she had said she was managing. He had been quiet for a moment and then he said, "I'm proud of you, Nadia, what you've built, how you handled yourself. I know it cost you a lot, I want you to know I see that." She had not expected those words from her father. She had not known how much she had needed them. She had thanked him and kept her voice steady through the call, and then, after she hung up, she had let herself feel how much they meant. The company continued to grow, not because the legal dismissal was a magic event that resolved everything, but because Nadia had continued working through the entire period with the same focused consistency she had brought to every other hard thing. Her clients had watched her handle a serious professional attack with integrity and precision, and they had concluded correctly that this was the kind of person whose business they wanted to be in. The large contract that had been the indirect trigger for her family's actions became the foundation for the next phase of the company's growth. She hired 2 more people. She opened a small second office. She added a service line she had been planning for a year but had been cautious about launching. The cautious moment was over. Tara, who had been the first person to bring Nadia the information that ultimately unraveled the complaint, was promoted and given a role that reflected what she had actually been doing for the company for more than a year. When Nadia offered her the title and the accompanying salary, Tara had looked at her with the kind of quiet, specific gratitude that comes from being seen accurately. Nadia understood that feeling well. She hoped to be the kind of leader who generated it. The question she returned to privately in the long, quiet moments after the business day ended, the question that she suspected many people like her returned to, was not about revenge or anger or justice. It was about the earlier version of herself who had sat at dinner tables and absorbed the faint condescension and the missed recognitions and the quiet erasures and had told herself it was fine, it was family, it did not mean anything, it would pass. That version of Nadia had been trying to hold a world together with her own willingness to minimize her pain. She had been trying to make peace at a cost she never totaled. She did not hate that version of herself, she understood her. She understood exactly why that version had existed and exactly what she had been trying to preserve. But she was no longer that person, and she had arrived at a clarity about that fact that felt different from determination. It felt like relief, like finally reaching the end of a very long corridor and finding that the door opened in the direction you had always hoped it would. Dean came to visit her at the office one afternoon about a year after the hearing. He asked to see the space. She gave him a real tour of the workstations, the conference table where she ran client meetings, the window that looked out over the street below where she sometimes stood when she needed to think. He had been quiet for most of it, and then he sat down in one of the chairs across from her desk and said, "You know, I always knew you were going to do something like this. I just didn't know it would be this much." She had laughed at that. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes without effort and means something. She told him she was glad he had come to the hearing. She told him it had mattered more than she had said at the time. He shrugged in the way that meant it had been obvious to him that there had been no other choice in his mind and that he did not need her to say more about it. They talked about their parents, about their father's health, about their mother's particular way of holding things together without examining them, about what it meant to love a family that was both real and imperfect and sometimes painful to navigate. They talked about Marcus in the careful, honest way that people talk about someone they know well who has disappointed them, not with hatred but with clarity. Before Dean left, he said something that Nadia wrote down that night in the notebook she kept on her bedside table. He said, "The thing that got you here wasn't that you were smarter than everyone or luckier than everyone. It was that you kept working on the actual thing instead of the performance of the thing. Most people work on the performance." She had sat with that for a long time after he left. She had been working on the actual thing, that was true, not because she was more disciplined by nature than other people, but because she had learned early that the actual thing was the only thing that held. Performances collapsed, impressions faded, good favor turned. The actual thing, the work, the record, the truth, that was what remained when everything else was removed. She had learned that through watching what happened around her, and she had learned it through this year in particular. Through sitting across a formal table from a family member who had tried to use the performance of concern to dismantle something real, and watching the actual thing hold. She was not finished building, she would not be for a long time. She was 35 now by the time this year of complexity had resolved itself into something she could live forward from. She had a business that was real and growing. She had a legal record that was clean. She had a small, specific group of people in her life who had shown her who they were when it mattered. She had a relationship with her family that was honest in a way it had never been before, not warmer and very sense, but more true, and she had decided that she would rather have the truth than the warmth that covered something else. There is a particular kind of strength that does not announce itself. It is not the kind that shows up at the beginning of a hard thing, full of confidence and momentum. It is the kind that shows up at the middle when the hard thing has gone on longer than anyone expected and the cost is becoming clear and the outcome is still uncertain. That kind of strength is built through a different process than the kind that comes naturally. It is built through choosing, again and again, to stay accurate and stay working when every easier option is available. Nadia had been building that kind of strength for longer than she knew. This year had shown her how much of it she had. She sat at her desk one morning, a Tuesday in midwinter, more than a year after the complaint had first arrived in that white envelope, and she looked at the quarterly report in front of her and the signed contracts beside it and the calendar full of client meetings that had continued to fill in steadily through all the noise of the previous year. She thought about the parking structure where she had sat in her car after having her third good idea ignored and asked herself what she actually wanted to do. She thought about the spreadsheet tracking every dollar. She thought about the first client, who still renewed every year and who had sent her a handwritten note when the regulatory determination was published. She thought about her father's voice on a Sunday morning saying, "I see that." She went back to work, that was what she always did. She went back to work and she did it well and she kept her record clean and she kept her eyes open and she let the actual thing be what it was, which was enough, which was more than enough, which was everything she had built it to be. And she kept building. If Nadia's story touched something in you today, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment below and tell me about a time you kept building something while people around you doubted it, dismissed it, or tried to take it apart. Tell me about the moment you stopped explaining yourself and let the work speak. Tell me about the person who showed up on your side when it counted. Those comments remind everyone watching that Nadia is not alone and neither are you. If this video meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear that quiet strength is still strength. Nadia will be back, so will you.